Hello! I've managed to get my hands on both new sets of Gansai Tambi watercolors by Kuretake, a set of 6 Sumi Colors, which are tinted inky paints, and my local art shop is now stocking not just the Sumi Colors but the Granulating Colours as well, so I bought a set. I mean, how could I not? But even before I open it, I'm annoyed because it comes with 5 colours and 1 empty pan. But whinging aside, I'm going to test out both sets today, so let's get into it! I'll start off with the Sumi Colors because this is the one that I bought first. And this one directly rivals the Boku set, which I reviewed a couple of years ago, and I'm not going to directly compare them in this video, but I just wanted to focus on the Kuretake set. So it's got Sumi red, yellow, green, blue, violet, and brown. Let's get the box open and take a closer look at the colours. That's assuming I can get it open because I always find the Kuretake boxes are really difficult. The tabs never want to come out, and I always end up cutting them off one side so I can just slide the box out like this. But here they all are, looking very dark. It's not that easy to tell between the colours. Maybe the Sumi yellow is the most obvious. The paints come in the same pans as all the other Gansai Tambi paints that they have in their range. And thankfully, printed on the bottom are the names of the colours so that if I drop this and they fall out, I can rearrange them easily without wondering which one is which. So while I'm in unboxing mode, I may as well open the Granulating Colours as well, and it's pretty much exactly the same sort of box, but this one only comes with 5 colours and 1 empty pan for mixing, apparently. But honestly, I feel like that's a real cop-out, and I do feel ripped off that there's only 5 colours because this box was more expensive than a lot of their other 6 colour sets. But let's take a look at what's actually in here. We have Aurora Red, Pink, Orange, Blue, and Violet. And yes, they're all made in Japan. I have all of the other Kuretake Gansai Tambi paints, and I really like them. I've made quite a few videos about them and swatched all 100 colours, and then of course they bring out another 2 sets, so I'll have to update that at some point. But I'll get this one open, and I'll slide it out so we can see what they look like dry. Weirdly enough, they all look red. It's such a strange looking palette, this one. And it would definitely look better if there were 6 colours. I'm not going to let that one go anytime soon. I'm convinced they could have made a 6th one, maybe Aurora Green, because that one is missing. Normally there's a green in the set. But if you ever wanted to know what an empty pan by Kuretake looks like, it looks like that, and I shall just fling it away in disgust. So the actual colours have the names printed underneath as well, which is really great because I would not know which colour is which in this set. They all look identical. And if I put them side by side, you can see what I mean. It's just really hard to tell what the colours are going to be like when they're dry like this. So let's swatch them out, shall we? Normally I'd swatch them in my large A4 book, but I just wasn't feeling that today, so I'm actually going to go with a different sketchbook. This one is Becky's skinny sketchbook, and I thought it could be fun to swatch the colours across an entire page spread, so I'll have the Sumis on the left side and then I'll put the Granulatings on the right. I'm pretty sure this paper is regular wood pulp cellulose rather than cotton, but it seems to be holding up to watercolours, so I figured I'd try them out on here. I did no measuring and of course wrote all of the words a little bit too close to each other, so it's not going to be a perfect swatching session, but I just really wasn't in the mood to rule lines, and I figured it would be fine to freehand this today. And at the end off camera I wrote Aurora Green, not Violet, because I had green on my mind. How long did it take me to figure that one out? But firstly I'm going to test out these Sumi colours. I painted some water on the paper first, and they do disperse relatively well. They also activate easily in water, and I had no issues getting any colour from the pan onto my paintbrush. All of the colours are very muted and have that dark, inky Sumi look to them. And while I didn't compare them to the Boku set, they're pretty much the same as each other, I would say. Or very close. So yellow doesn't really go into black, it's not the nicest colour in the world, but it does make a kind of yellowish green colour. It's never my favourite one, but it did flow out nicely onto the paper. And the next is the green colour, which is much darker, and a bluer green. I tend to prefer this shade of green to the yellow. And next up is Sumi Blue, or it will be once I pick up some paint on my brush. This one's a lot closer to black than the first 3 colours, but there is definitely a bluish undertone to it, so it's like a cool Payne's grey. and I really like it as an ink colour. Next is Sumi Violet. This one is definitely leaning towards the more purple red and is warmer. It almost looks like a neutral tint in watercolours, so I quite like that one too. You can probably see how they are quite different to each other, the Sumi Blue and Violet. Last up is Sumi Brown, and this one's really intense. Wow, that one runs so much. I really like it. It's such an opaque, deep, inky brown colour. I'll come back to these when they're dry, but I'm going to swatch out the Granulating set now. I'm a fan of granulating paints. I really like how they behave. These ones are interesting. Let's just put it that way. I'll paint a few out before I pass judgment so you can see how they work. They really do spread in water. That is one thing in their favour. But I noticed that they only want to go in one layer. When I started putting more layers on, you could probably see how difficult it's being already. So that was Aurora Red. And next up is the pink. Now, I had a look just before, so at the time of filming, I cannot find any pigment information on these particular colours. Kuretake's website didn't have them on there when I looked, so if this gets updated, I will link it in the description below. But for now, I have no idea what pigments are in here. This Aurora Orange is such a funny one. It comes out this hideous green colour, and I actually tested out some other paints by a company called Supervision, which had a paint that split out like this almost exactly the same way, and here's where I realised I'd written green instead of violet. Honestly, on first impressions, I think the Supervision one was much better than this. But I'll continue to the next one, which is Aurora Blue, and this one actually turned out quite pretty. I like this one much better than the previous orange. But once again, when you add more than one layer, it just does not want to sit on the paper as nicely. Last up is Aurora Violet, not green, and this is by far my favourite colour of all of them. This is such a beautiful purple, but there is going to be an issue with this one, which I'm going to show later in the video. I just wanted to swatch them all out first so you can see what they look like. And maybe you can kind of see how they're settling out into split colours. This is just while they're wet, so you really do need to let them dry fully to see how they'll behave. But let's take a look at all of them dried. There's a bit of cauliflowering on this wood pulp paper. But overall, I like the muted colour palette. I find I need to paint more than one layer to get really dark colours. But I'll move over to these ones. There is some granulation going on. I could see it mostly in the Aurora Orange, but I'm not convinced that these are true granulating paints. I think one of them is granulating and the other might be a dye, and that's why there's a lot of separation of colour, because the granulating paint is a lot heavier and then the dye is going to disperse out into the paper because it's much lighter. It is most noticeable in that orange, I think. I'm pretty sure that the violet colour has a purple fluorescent dye in it too. We'll see that in my painting, but here are all of the colours together. I really want to explore them further in some paintings before I give a final verdict as to what I think about them. So let's do that now. The colour that caught my eye the most is the Aurora Violet, and I immediately thought of a wizard, so I'm painting in the background with it, and I have to say the spread was amazing on cotton paper. And when I left it in one layer like this, it splits out really beautifully into blue and violet tones. And this really does seem to be the best way to use the Aurora paints. Wetting the paper first and then dropping the colour into it so it can disperse out into the water. I noticed when I was painting it dry like I am here on the wizard's beard, it acts just more like regular paint, with the granulation and separation of colour being a lot less noticeable. And once you start adding more than one layer, it really does kind of negate the whole separation effect and the colours get too dark. You'll see that I'm using the Sumi inks here as well in the painting, and that's because the granulating ones never got very dark for me. I found them to be quite low tinting and they never got very saturated, and I couldn't achieve really dark values from them. But the Sumi paints were nice and dark, so I was able to paint the shadow areas and get a good contrast between light to dark. I mostly painted with Sumi Violet, and that went nicely with the Granulating Violet. I also added in some of the blue and a bit of red as well, but most of this painting is actually just done with the Sumi Violet and the Aurora Violet. You could probably see here, now I'm going in a bit darker with that Aurora Violet, that it's really not granulating at all that I can see, and I was getting minimal separation. So when using them in a more detailed painting like this, it kind of defeats their purpose and they don't work as well. Personally, I think their best use would be for backgrounds, like I've done here, because it showcases that separation in colour a lot better. I was too far into this painting though to give up, so I just kept going, and eventually I got something that I'm relatively happy with, and I do love the darkness of the Sumi inks. I actually had to alter the colours in Photoshop because here's what the original scan looked like. All of the violet has disappeared, and this leads me to think that it's a dye and it is not going to be light fast at all. So that is definitely something to consider when thinking about purchasing these paints. But these technicalities aside, here's a closer look at this painting, and maybe you can see what I mean, that by adding extra layers, it mostly negates that colour splitting effect and it just looks like one colour. Whereas on the background where I've only done one layer, it's much easier to see the different colour tones in that one paint, along with a little bit of granulating. I'm kind of regretting painting these circles on there, they look a bit stupid. I'd mixed in some Kuretake white gold to make them look more shimmery and magical, but I don't know that I achieved that very well. It does kind of shine in the light though. It looks quite good on his beard where I also painted it. I guess it's okay, but it's not the best thing I've ever painted. But now it's time to see some even worse paintings, and I decided to use some different paper. I've got what I think is Japanese rice paper in my collection, and I thought I'd give this a try. It is incredibly thin, and I wasn't sure if this was going to hold up to water at all. But I've had this paper for so many years, I thought I would actually try to use some of it. I also have some Japanese Tomori River paper. This is also very thin, 52 GSM, it's like Bible paper, but it also holds fountain pen ink very well, so I thought it might work for these. But I'm going to start with this Japanese rice paper, at least that's what I think it is, and I was trying to do a traditional Japanese ink painting. I don't know what I'm doing, so it is a total disaster, and also my camera decided to focus on my hand and not the paper, so I do apologise that it is slightly out of focus. But I have to say, this paper held up amazingly well to the water. I thought it was going to crinkle up or the water would soak through, but no, it actually just sat on top of the paper and it was fine. I'm using the green Sumi ink for this particular painting, or sketch, whatever it is. It's supposed to be mountains, and then I tried to paint in some little trees, like a Japanese scene, but I clearly need a lot more practice with this. I was also using some Japanese brushes that I bought from Daiso ages ago. The bigger one has hairs that keep falling out of it, it's so annoying, but the small one works quite nicely. I like the Sumi ink set though. The different paints blend out nicely in water and it becomes very smooth. I was just mixing it out on a little dish here just so I could get different dilutions of paint, and you can see it goes pretty dark, but you can also get some much lighter washes. So it's quite versatile in that respect. One colour can give a huge amount of value range, which is fantastic. I also tried the granulating paints on some of this paper, and these are supposed to be Japanese carp. It's very abstract, but you can see how much that Aurora red has split out on this fish that I'm painting now. I was using some of the Sumi ink to paint in the fins and eyes, so it's a combination of both sets here. But really, this whole thing was a total disaster. But I kept persevering so that I would have something to show in this video. But I definitely have some bad painting days where I just can't seem to do anything. It all looks like a mess. This was one of them. It doesn't really matter though. I was just having a bit of fun with these paints and seeing what they could do. Experimenting with a few techniques that I have no idea about, and I was just making it up as I went along. Not everything has to be a finished work of art. Some things can just be little sketches too. I've got one last one. This is on the Tomoe River paper, and I thought I would paint out some flowers with these granulating paints. But once again, I am really not seeing any actual granulation. It's just two different colours splitting out from each other, and I left it in one layer. I didn't go over it again because I've learned my lesson from that. And I used Sumi red to paint outlines and make them look more like flowers, although they're still very abstract. If I'm perfectly honest with you, I'm not really feeling this granulating set at all. Like, I've used some other granulating paints which are so much nicer than these ones. I know that some other YouTubers have reviewed this set as well recently, so I would recommend going and checking out their opinions as well, because this is just mine. I don't particularly like them. Maybe other people do, maybe other people are getting better results than I managed to get today. But I have to say that all of the Kuretake paints that I have tried, and it's pretty much all of them, the granulating ones are my least favourite. So here are all three of these little sketchy paintings. They're not very good, but I am quite surprised at how well this paper held up to the paint. And I'm glad I finally had a chance to test some of it. If I go over the back, you can see it is coming through a little bit, but not as badly as I thought, considering how absolutely thin it is. I think those Sumi inks should be nice and light fast. I wouldn't be worrying about that with them. I don't know about the granulating ones, what's in there, but here are the fishies, and I do quite like the effect on this one over here. At least you can see two different colours, and that's quite nice. But yeah, overall I'm not very impressed with them. They just don't really inspire me the way that other granulating paints I've used have done so in the past. Anyway, here's the last one. Can you see what I mean, that there's just not much granulation? There is a little bit of colour splitting, and to be fair, this paper is incredibly smooth, so that could also be affecting the results. The Sumi paint went really nicely on this paper, and I would consider sketching with them on here again, because I've got plenty more of that paper as well. But this is pretty much everything I got done today, and of course I did the swatches too in my skinny sketchbook. I think this book worked out really well for these limited palettes. Maybe because all of the colours are kind of dull, I wasn't quite as inspired as I would be with really bright colours. It's just me. But here's the wizard painting I did as well. I've actually swatched out the purple and put it in the window to see if it is light fast or if it's going to fade really quickly. According to my scanner, that violet is going to disappear. But I'd love to hear in the comments if you've got any of these paints and what do you think of them. Personally, if I was going to choose one set, I would go for the Sumi Colors, just because they're nicer to use, and they worked exactly as I expected them to, because I have the Boku Undo set and they are pretty much the same as that. These ones, I'm disappointed that there are only 5 colours, and I am just not inspired by them at all, unfortunately. And that makes me sad because I love Kuretake products, but I feel like those ones could be so much better than they are. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it was helpful. I'd really appreciate a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and you might want to subscribe for more videos. Here's the other brand of Sumi paints I reviewed, and the Supervision Granulating Colours, so you can get an idea of the difference. I hope you're all having a great day out there, and I'll see you all again really soon in my next video. Swatch you later. Bye!